We've had an election. What impact will it have on local entrepreneurship and innovation, economic development strategies? We'll talk about that today on Builders Live. Hey, I am Chris Winik. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Technically, a news organization with a community of technologists and entrepreneurs. There was a U.S. election on Tuesday. That means President Donald Trump will return as president in January. We at Technically are not a national news site focused on politics, so this conversation will not be about national politics, but national elections have consequences at a local level. So to that end, we're going to talk about the impact that this might have, what changes or doesn't change about entrepreneurship and innovation strategy locally. To talk about that, I have Brian Brackeen, the founder and the managing partner of Lightship Capital, and Maria Underwood, a longtime ecosystem builder out of Birmingham, Alabama. We'll talk a little bit about that. Brian, Maria, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks
for having me.
Brian, Maria, I'll start with maybe a dangerous question, but you take the layer of depth you want to have. How did the election on Tuesday change the work that you have, knowing that whichever path might have had a change? Brian, what changed Tuesday for the work that you do in your own way?
So everything changed and nothing changed, right? When I say nothing changed, I'm talking about when you work with founders in early stage companies, they should be razor focused on their customer. They should be razor focused on getting the capital they need to be successful. And that work shouldn't change from administration to administration, full stop. The reality, though, is that there are these distractions to the business, everything from politics to climate, right? And the presidential election plays a role in every other major distraction to a business, even rates. There's a debate today about whether or not the folks at the Fed should be moving on or not. So these are important questions that founders need to be thinking about at a macro level, but really, really micro. If you're going to be successful, you're really focused on the micro level.
Maria.
Yeah, I agree with everything Brian said. I do think that, I mostly work with women founders, Black founders, and founders in under-resourced communities like here in Birmingham. I do think we're going to see a little bit of difference going forward in terms of emphasis on gender equity and VC funding, and how founders can move kind of in the space and the lens of what going into next year. And I also think right now we're just dealing with a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of speculation. There's a lot of conversation. We don't know a lot going into next year of what's going to come into policy, what's going to stay in policy. So to Brian's point, it's good to be laser focused at the moment, but I also know that there are health tech founders, social impact founders who are kind of looking at their companies of, will this be feasible in an administration, particularly in the health tech space? And how do I navigate kind of this chaos again, that we might be kind of stepping into with a new unknown?
Let me linger, because I know whenever with such partisan national politics, if we roughly feel like half or more of our country have an opinion about any presidential change, one of the things of the last decade we've talked a lot about is how much you should or shouldn't separate work. And I think lots of people have just different personal opinions. And in my view as a journalist, that's just the tricky thing, is you to just view that differently. Whether you think that you can't separate work in person, and that's entirely okay, and you'll have a certain view and philosophy, and others who want to separate those things. So I don't pretend to tell anyone should handle it any other way than that most serves them. So I wonder if I could just ask you two as individuals, how much do you view your wanting to or being able to celebrate your personal views, philosophies from the kind of work that you do, and speak about it however you want to? Maria, maybe I'll start with you just because.
Yeah, I think for startup founders in particular, yes, for business, it's good to separate how you feel politically, how you feel about business, because those two things can be different. But founders are a breed that most of the time they've started a company because they care deeply about something they want to make a difference on. Not every founder, you have a lot of B2B SaaS founders who may care deeply about that product, but not the social impact of it. But in my lens of working with founders, it has been people who are building solutions for community fintech, for health tech, for finding better childcare for families. So those people are building because they're passionate about it. And it is really hard to look at, I think, things that are happening politically in any administration and saying, okay, this is going to negatively affect this passion that I have for this business, and now I have to merge them in some way.
Right.
So on my side, Maria and I are focused on ecosystems that are in red states, right? And so that in itself is a juggling act, high wire, juggling knives kind of act that Maria does every day, as I do here in Ohio. But I'll say this, because of that, someone you're working with, whether it be a partner, fellow employee, or what have you, definitely is most likely to have a different opinion about politics in the world than you do. If you try to cocoon yourself away from these other groups, you will get absolutely nothing done in 35 states in this country. And so you've got to find a way to push forward.
And I'll note that obviously the one of the points here is that we have folks on both sides that view it differently, and I know we technically have tried to navigate that, and I think we've been hollered at for both not doing enough to clarify personal opinions and somehow still criticized for also injecting personal opinion. So I feel like it's ultimately you as an individual are going to have to make your opinion and just pick a lane, because I think whichever you pick, someone will feel he could have done it a little bit differently.
I think opinions.
Yeah,
sorry, Chris. I think opinions, that does matter. I do think you already know it is no secret that women funders and minority funders get so little VC money. I think women got 2% last year of all VC funds, less for Black women, less for Latinx women or men. I think you see large VC firms, a lot have been contributed to political campaigns. I think they're in this particular climate going into next year. There has already been, under this administration, it's proven, we're back at it again, a lack of emphasis on gender and equity, social impact. And so I do think that founders who are in a certain criteria are feeling a little bit nervous about getting funds. How are the VC funds going to happen next year if it's a women fund? Focusing on women, focusing on Black founders, like how is that going to play out and how is that going to affect fundraising capabilities for startup founders? And I think that's a big question mark going forward.
We linger on that for a sec. Brian, I know you have some personal experience. I'll just share. We technically have done some reasonable reporting, the court case that followed the Fearless Fund out of Atlanta, and how and whether and where that had impact on corporate focused investment funds, programs, or resources for either specifically naming Black women, Black founders, generally, or other category or identity groups. I've been criticized for taking a too dispassionate view, but just to pull out for a sec from as a kind of a news organization approach, following how and when these strategies change has a deeply personal experience for lots of folks. Don't mean to overlook that at all. It's deeply personal in any form. But Brian, I'm kind of curious how you have already seen shifts take place and where and how VC dollars are being allocated, when and where programs and resources can update their approaches. Have you already seen this following court cases, and whether this seems like just a continuation of the challenge of the changes that have already taken place?
Yeah, anyone that does this work is very familiar with the ebb and flow of both law and culture throughout your career, right? So at the kind of tip top, there's the George Floyd period where everyone was focused on the work that you were doing. And it felt like, at least for a period of time, that we'd finally taken a huge step forward. And I would argue that we took 3 steps forward and only 1 step back. But that was that period. There are other periods, like some of the previous Trump periods, where just the term DEI at all, right, has come under attack and probably will be under attack in the next administration. I would say that there's really 2 real specific answers. In the world of private investments, if I put my kind of VC hat on, I think you're still continue to be safe. I would remind people that Fearless Fund has the word fund in its name, but the entity that was sued is the nonprofit entity. 2 different things, right? When you're stewarding private funds, if a billionaire gives me $1 million to invest, that's their money, and I can invest it wherever we agree to invest that. I'm an extension of private capital. When you're doing things for public benefit, there are and there can be different rules. Again, Trump administration and certain judges have taken a broader view there than others have in the past. But ultimately, we've always had to navigate both worlds.
I want to push forward, but just you guys hit on an important thing that I think, again, I can back into some rigorous reporting we technically did. We dropped in 2023 a report called The Inclusion Edge, underwritten by UBS, on the kind of where inclusive entrepreneurship investing came from and how the research underpinning evolved over time. It very much had a beginnings as a moral imperative. We need representation because it's a socially just thing to do. But additional research rigor backed it up to argue there's also an enormous economic loss when portions of your population are underrepresented in in-demand STEM roles or not participating in economic heights. This is the Raj Chetty lost Einstein's argument that if you simply have less inventors or less entrepreneurs or less VC-backed dollars, if you purely want an economic reasoning, you're just missing out on a percentage of your population to have breakthrough research or breakthrough inventiveness. So I also think we have just watched the maturation of this work that we could also just argue when we miss residents in our most economically dynamic parts of our communities, we all miss out on those breakthrough inventions. And that's a sound economic theory I just wanted to touch on. I got to keep moving, and there's a lot that I want to go deeper. I know there's a lot that we're trying to hit on. Brian, you started this conversation by saying, everything and nothing changed. I almost want to revisit that because I don't want to act as if only things would have changed if Donald Trump was elected. Whenever there's an administration change, national priorities come down to local. For an example, we technically have reported rigorously on those 3 massive Biden spending bills that, in part, as one small example, funded a $500 million tech hubs program that put in 12 states around this country massive advanced research efforts. We saw Build Back Better dollars in Western PA and another 10 or so markets around the country fund big advancements. So the Biden administration made fundamental changes to what happened at local reality. So it's sensible to say something might change here with the Trump administration. So Brian, Maria, kind of curious, how do you view your work would have changed either way? Like, just revisit what is just going to be different simply because new priorities have. Do you have that clarity yet, or are you not sure what will change about your work?
Oh, it's super clear. It's super clear. And so there's an example of that would be the CHIPS Act, right? At the time, generally heralded as a good thing, good for America. We're building an Intel fab here in Ohio. It's like to tens of billions of dollars being spent on
a bipartisan bill. We should add with both
very bipartisan bill. In these last few weeks, some folks in the House have said, "Hey, in the next administration, I don't know if the CHIPS Act was a good idea. Maybe we should revisit that." Right, and that's this huge local impact because it isn't just the Intel fab, but it's dozens, if not hundreds, of smaller companies that get spun up all around the Intel fabrication facility. So it has a huge local impact.
I think too with this election, it's not a normal election, I think, for a lot of reasons, but in particular because it's not just the president that's changing, it's the entire governing body. It's the House and the Senate. So anything that wants to be changed by one party is going to move through, and it's going to move through fast and without a ton of roadblock, quite frankly. And I think that is different than what we've seen in different administrations, because you might have executive orders or public policies going through, but that you've got this fight in the Senate and the House, and you've got to figure it out, and it's going to stall. This time it's different. I think energy tech companies are going to have an interesting time. We've seen what happened with the U.S. pulling out of the, Paris Climate Accord under the last Trump administration. There's not a big focus on energy in a lot of ways, but VCs kind of stuck up to that last time in 2016. I think we'll see a lot of venture funds still going into energy tech because of the global ramifications of how important that is. So I think there are some industries that will still do really well and will still thrive. I know here in Alabama, a lot of the money that is being pushed into the tech ecosystem right now is no longer venture capital, and it's no longer corporates. It's all from tax credits and from straight down from the government. We have a large governing body that is statewide that is doing such great work to invest in the tech ecosystem, but that is all government appropriated funds. So in an ecosystem like ours that requires so much on tax credits for companies who invest in tech organizations, government money that is investing directly into startups it starts to make the ecosystem potentially look a little nervous because that money can be reallocated pretty quickly in a new administration.
And Chris, at the risk of going back to back here for you, but she inspired me to make another point.
Maria's inspirational.
It's absolutely amazing. Also, an inward-looking administration, and that's what the people have asked for. They want to focus on our roads, our jobs, our communities, and I understand, and I accept that rationale post-election. But I will also say, folks like China and other countries are eating our lunch in Latin America and Africa and other places where we need to be making U.S. investments and sharing the gospel of capitalism in our style as opposed to other groups. It's really, really important for the long-term stability of the world.
I want to, I'm running short on time with you guys, and I want to put a little time into what entrepreneurship-led economic development strategies might look like moving forward. But one question I feel like I got to hit, Bri. We technically have, well, one, Maria, thank you for calling out. There were local elections, and we technically are dutifully reporting on those local outcomes. So to be clear, this conversation's looking at the national simply because we know that drifts down to local realities. But technically, this newsroom will always look at the local first and foremost. But Brian, super prominent, was tech reemerged here as on the national stage and was more politically divided. There were Republican and Democrat backers. Prominently, there were some Trump administration backers from real prominent VCs. And they went to some bread and butter kind of classic Republican issues, lighter regulation, with an introduction of crypto being an example of that, reducing capital gains, like real bread and butter classic issues. You sit with over a fund. You both have to look at tax implications. You also have your own personal philosophies. I'm kind of curious how you looked at this, where VC went in this election, and what you think plays out now that there's been a clear mandate from the American people on what should move forward.
Yeah, I'm highly sympathetic to those points. I've got to tell you, what happens really in any kind of VC's life is many of us have run businesses and we see the world a certain way, certainly almost always fiscally responsible. Now, we might have different social impacts. And for me, particularly like you see some of these voting laws, I want my grandparents to be able to vote, that kind of thing. So that tends to steer my politics. But even then, even VCs that are, I say on the left, they're center left at best, because there are some strong points on the other side. I often say there are two types of people in this world: one that's run payroll and one that hasn't. Right. So if you had to actually pay people, how important tax law and regulation is to getting that money to the people.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask more, but I'm not going to, just because we're short on time and we'll have years of conversations to have. So last setup, I want to go. Count this as our primer conversation a couple days after election. But next week, I'm leading a session actually on entrepreneurship as a bipartisan strategy. So I want to just talk shop with you guys for my last few minutes. Because something that I love about local news, one reason I've always been interested in local news is similar why I've always found local entrepreneurship at tech and innovation community so inspiring, that I think at that level, I have seen people with different political philosophies still able to talk about making their communities stronger, more vibrant. I believe solutions can take place at the local level. It's what always inspires me about local. I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts. If you were talking to an audience of ecosystem builders, this will end up informing a piece I'm writing. And that presentation I'm talking to. You guys have navigated lots of rooms with lots of different political backgrounds, affiliations, and philosophies. What are some thoughts you'd have to a room of an audience of ecosystem builders who are looking at using entrepreneurship to gain bipartisan support for whatever goals they might have locally? What thoughts do you have for them?
I'm looking at you, Brian. But I can go first if you want.
I'd like to end on you because I think it'll be perfect.
Oh God, no pressure.
My quick answer is, in a previous cycle like this, we were pulled aside by a really high-ranking member of the administration here in Ohio, and they said, look, I know that one group uses these words. We want the same outcome, but we use these words, right?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that we want jobs, right? And we want jobs to go to everybody in Ohio. And our strategy for Ohioans of color, maybe go through you, but we just are focused on jobs in general. And if you can always make your work about jobs, you'll always have, funding from us, right? If you make it about identity, right, then it makes it harder, right? And so it's just a matter of changing some language at different times.
I agree with that. I think I've already seen some corporates in town change things from, Black Business Alliance to Business Alliance. I do think we name things for a reason because there was inequity. And so in order to make sure things stay equitable, you have to call it out sometimes. I think we're moving into a period, to your point, Brian, where you can't do that as easily or still get the funding that you need to kind of thrive and survive in that way. So we're going to have to grapple with that, I think, culturally. And that's a long, different conversation. I think looking at it in entrepreneurship from a bipartisan support is if we are turning to this interior focused, to what everyone said earlier, if we want to support what's going on here, I think it's supporting the entrepreneurs in your community. It's funding who's in your backyard, and then it's helping them grow and expand and hire locally as well. It's something that we're already focused on here in Birmingham and the state of Alabama of how can we help people grow roots in this state and help them do workforce development training, make sure we're training all of our students in HBCUs and in colleges to make them stay in Alabama and help them find really well-paying quality jobs in this state. I think that's how we're going to have to talk about it going forward. We want to retain our tax dollars, our paying citizens to stay here, and that's going to help our economic development. And if we can keep talking about it in terms of how do we support our people, I think to Brian's point as well, then we're going to continue to be able to make some progress.
Maybe I'll take a last chance to have you guys give me some advice. So I'm gonna get dinged, as I often do, about not going hard on an array of issues, and we technically talk about when we pick our lane on topics we care about: election and integrity, rule of law, deficit spending, a lot of stuff that I will be roundly critical of any administration for going outside of those boundaries. But I'm navigating how, as a journalist, I want to speak to a bipartisan audience and engage an audience, and separating out personal issues, personal thoughts. I guess I'm curious, what do you want out of a news organization that has a responsibility to speak truthfully about hard issues? But I think that local and entrepreneurship is inspiring to me because I believe and have seen it could bring people together from all different backgrounds. What do you want out of technically an environment where there will be issues we should punch hard on, and there are times when I think we shouldn't, and I'll still probably get criticized for not pushing hard enough? What do you guys want out of us?
I mean, for me, pure entrepreneurship reporting should be bipartisan. There's nothing about it that should be partisan. What I would love to see pushing is, we can't ignore funding disparities, right? If that's a news story, to pretend it doesn't exist is actually not telling a story, right? That's for me, a clear bar.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think my layer with that is that if you look at, particularly, I've worked in women's organizations, so I'm going to speak mostly to women founders. Women lead differently. And while they receive 2% of VC funding, if you look at the statistics, most women-led companies use those money more. They're more successful. They're less likely to risk. They're less likely to run companies that have high turnover rates. And so for the difference in the amount of funding they get and then the amount of quality of company they run, I think is very different. And for that to not continue to be highlighted, quite frankly, under an administration where I think a lot of women are feeling some type of way. I think I would like to continue to see women's leadership in being a founder lifted up, because not just because they're women, but because they statistically have more successful companies and use VC dollars better.
Thank you guys for one of, I'm sure, many conversations to have. I'm actually drawn to know that this sign behind me is a internal slogan of ours, that journalism is a storytelling tactic to help a community come closer to its approximation of truth. And so that's what we're after to do. We do it through the local lens of entrepreneurship and tech workforce, and we're going to need the help of people like Brian Brackeen and Maria Underwood to inform how we do that. Thank you, guys. Additional feedback will be welcome. This will inform the first of a series of reporting about how any national political change impacts the work that we do. Brian, Maria, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks, Brian.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. See you next time.